And speaking of Philadelphia sports, I wanted to bring on our next guest because 2016 is almost over. For some people, that's a good thing. For some people, that's a bad thing. But either way, a lot of things happened in Philadelphia sports this year, and I thought I'm no better person to review it all with than Philadelphia Daily News columnist and Philadelphia.com sports columnist Marcus Hayes here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Marcus, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm well, Josh, and yourself?
Doing pretty good. So, with a lot of things going on in Philadelphia sports this year, I thought you would be a good person to bring on and review it all. And I wanted to start with the Eagles because obviously the Eagles, this is a football town, first and foremost, always. And with everything that's going on this year, there's so many variables that have happened. But I think to me, the biggest thing is the Eagles have a franchise quarterback. And it's really only, I feel like, the third time in the last 30 years they've had that caliber of quarterback. And that's saying a lot for a franchise that even though they haven't won a Super Bowl, for them to have stability at the quarterback position is paramount.
I agree. I mean, since the West Coast offense, since the sort of emergence of the West Coast offense, and since passing has become sort of legislated as the preferred means to matriculate the ball down the field, a franchise quarterback, a guy that you can depend on to, number one, be healthy, number two, not turn the ball over, and then number three, make plays, has been much more important than, the traditional franchise running back like a Barry Sanders or an Emmitt Smith. You can have both, which Dallas may have. It's optimal, but certainly it's the first step toward being relevant for, a 5 or 10 year span.
What are some of the things that you have seen from Carson Wentz that have stood out to you, positive and negative, so far this year?
Physically, he's an excellent athlete. Mechanically, he's improved and he's willing to improve. But more than anything, mentally, he's incredibly resilient. He's very, very confident, and he understands the game. He understands how football unfolds in front of a quarterback, what defenses want to do, what his offense is capable of doing. His issue, like with most young quarterbacks, is being able to mechanically execute with precision and speed. That will come. But I have not seen one game in which I thought that Carson Wentz has regressed. I didn't see one moment where I thought Carson Wentz was unconfident. And his physical skills seem to be growing day by day. It's really fun to watch.
I remember in the game versus the Giants, and I know he threw an interception on the play, and that's kind of like a no-no, but his escapability in the pocket and then his desire to throw the bomb downfield, all I saw was Brett Favre in that moment because we've heard Carson Wentz say his idol was Brett Favre, and if I've been telling people, if you potentially have an athletic version of Brett Favre out there, the Eagles have a very, very bright future.
Well, you happen to hit on a kind of a peeve of mine. I believe Brett Favre is vastly overrated, though he was a wonderfully talented quarterback. His successor, Aaron Rodgers, is appreciably better. What Carson did in that moment is he's almost cursed by his own ability. He has a big arm, and he's wonderfully athletic and tough. But that was a bad pass, and that was a bad decision. Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie baited him into throwing that pass the way Brett Favre was often baited into throwing passes. Teams would scheme to make Brett Favre think that the pass was open. So hopefully he grows out of his Brett Favre-like tendencies and is better than Brett Favre. I mean, Brett Favre is iconic, I understand, but Brett Favre lost a lot more games than he won with that arm and that gunslinging attitude. That said, he's a great place to start. I mean, the number one responsibility of a quarterback is to protect the football. And if that is his number one priority going forward, the Eagles will be very successful. And I think he's learned that. One of the things that young quarterbacks, especially athletic young quarterbacks who come from inferior programs, and 1AA, FCS is inferior by definition. What they can't learn without going through it is the speed, not only of the game, but of the defenders. The defenders at this level are mutant. They're superheroes. You can't understand it. And so you can't beat them with your arm 9 times out of 10. So you learn your limitations. And as he learns his limitations, he'll become better and better and better. One of the reasons Aaron Rodgers is the greatest quarterback ever is because he watched Brett Favre fail so much and understood that pass just doesn't exist for anyone, whether it's Cam Newton or Brett Favre or Dan Marino or, Carson Wentz.
Marcus, speaking of rookies, Doug Peterson in his first year as head coach, I know some people have been, jumping off the bridge saying this guy is horrible, we don't want him, but I argue he has more wins in his first season than Andy Reid, who's the winningest head coach in franchise history, and he is learning on the job. He was never a head coach in the NFL before. He was never a head coach in college. And I say that we should have a wait-and-see approach with Doug Peterson and see if he actually does learn from the mistakes of his first season. What do you think?
Yeah, Doug is in a tough position because anything he does will be amplified because of his lack of experience and because of his attachment to Andy Reid and Andy Reid's first year here. Doug Peterson came in as kind of a punchline in Philadelphia. Oh, Doug Peterson, he's no Donovan McNabb. Doug Peterson this, Doug Peterson that. Andy Reid's first season, he was given a much, much better team, especially defensively, than was Doug Peterson. On the other hand, he was playing in a much better National Football League and in a much better division than the NFC East, even though the NFC East has improved this season. I agree with you. Doug Peterson may be a wonderful coach. He may be a terrible coach. Most coaches are bad. Most coaches don't last. Him being a bad coach 5 years from now is not a fait accompli at this point, but it's probable. That said, you have to give young guys, fresh chances. And this should not be his only chance. He should at least be given another 2 years to nurture his quarterback, to rearrange his defense, and to have say in personnel now that he knows exactly what he needs, much more so than you can tell on film or tell on, college film or opponent film. He knows what his guys can and can't do, how they need to practice, how they need to be cared for. It takes 3 or 4 years. Nobody wants to give anyone 3 or 4 years anymore, but it takes 3 or 4 years, especially when you have a rookie quarterback and really no number one wide receiver or number one running back.
It's interesting you say that because I played the audio of Schwartz earlier. Jim Schwartz at the media was asked about, coaches not be giving a lot of time and players a lot of time to develop. And, Schwartz did his typical, well, I'm not the guy to ask about that. Then he went on to give his 2-minute opinion. And, Schwartz.
I love Jim Schwartz for that.
Yeah, me too. He always gives like a disclaimer, and then he gives his opinion. But yeah. He went on to say that, there was a time in the NFL where players and coaches were allowed to develop. In today's world, they're not allowed. And he even mentioned the fact that, when he started in the NFL, there was a view of if you started a rookie, it was viewed as an automatic loss. So, you look at what Doug Peterson has already done and the fact that the players like him, Marcus. Like, they didn't like Chip Kelly. They didn't want to play for Chip Kelly. The players actually want to play for Doug Peterson. To me, that's a bonus in and of itself.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. You don't have many former players coaching. You have a lot of guys who kind of played on the periphery coaching, but Doug's been around, and he's very sensitive to what players want and need and how to sort of handle them and have them respect him. I'll bet you that Josh Huff really likes Doug Peterson, even though Doug Peterson was part of the decision-making process that cut him. I bet you Doug Peterson, at the end of the season, will not have one guy say, Doug was terrible, even to his best friend. That doesn't make him a good coach. He's a pretty good guy. It doesn't make him a good coach. But I think in this world we live in now, it is important to have your players respect you to the degree that they like you, because we're dealing with a different animal now. We're not dealing with soldiers anymore. We're dealing with millennials. We're dealing with people who need to have input. We're dealing with people who want to be respected and who do not quail in front of authority. Doug's the right type of person for this job, even if he's not the right guy for this job.
Speaking of the right guy for the job, one more point on the Eagles here. Harry Roseman's in the front office, and he made a lot of moves that got a lot of oohs and ahs during the offseason, but now we're looking at how the season has progressed, and we're seeing there are still holes on this team. Does the next offseason say a lot about Howie Roseman's long-term sustainability in the NFL as a front office man?
Well, from my perspective, I think that what he did this season, the effect of what he did this season, should keep him from having another season, another chance to fail. He is the issue here, much more so than Doug, mainly because they had X number of issues. He addressed 0 of those issues to the degree that they needed to be addressed. And if he made those decisions and all of them missed, then that's a huge problem. That means, and it's not his first year, it's his 4th year with autonomy. So, certainly next year will be the make or break year if this year isn't already. I would not be surprised. I don't think it'll happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if Jeffrey Lurie fires Howie Roseman and either promotes Joe Douglas or, does a front office house cleaning. However, certainly next year has to be the year because he's failed over and over and over again. You have to bet more than 500 with your draft picks and more than 200 with your free agents. I mean, especially your free agents. He had to cut 2 free agent wide receivers out of camp. I might have fired him then.
Real quick, you mentioned that you could see Jeffrey Lurie getting rid of Roseman and keeping Peterson. It's always been suggested that Roseman and Lurie had this long, ongoing, very good relationship. Do you think Lurie would actually, forego the relationship and say, listen, Howie, you're not doing the job no matter how much I like you. I got to get somebody else in here to do that?
On merit, yes. In practice, no. I believe that Howie is his blind spot, and Howie represents for him the non-athletic guy who entered the world of athletics and made it big, made good. And, much more so than Jeffrey. Howie has been a byproduct of Joe Banner's reign. He is Joe Banner 2.0 or Joe Banner Light, much more so than he's anything but Jeffrey's, would-be son. You know what I mean? Jeffrey's his cheerleader. Joe Banner was his mentor. And that's a great mentor to have. And Howie is really good at a lot of things. He's really, really good at managing a team and understanding the finances of football and understanding the operations of a football team. He's a very valuable guy to have, but I don't want him in my draft room.
Speaking of draft, let's move over to the Sixers, a team that's pretty much at this point infamous for the way they did draft and who they did draft. And I think at this point, ending the season, I don't think we're that much farther along than we were to begin the year in 2016, which is you still have a team with a glut at one position, and they neglected other positions, Marcus.
Well, my contention for ever since they traded Michael Carter-Williams, who may not be a real NBA point guard at any point in his career, since they traded him, they've never had any hope at point guard, much less an actual viable starting NBA point guard. My contention in this offseason was because you had these 3 bigs, all of whom you expected to play, you had to have a professional seasoned point guard. If you had to overpay for him, if you had to trade more assets than you wanted to for him, that was the most important thing to have. And you see at the ends of games how the team disintegrates with Sergio Rodriguez and T.J. McConnell running it. They are the problem. That's why there's been so little progress. I will argue that there has been some progress, certainly in the case of Joel Embiid, who you can sort of see growing before your eyes. It's like watching one of those, like the Incredible Hulk. It's almost like every time you look back, he's bigger and stronger and meaner and more skilled. It's just remarkable to see him grow day by day. Last night he went coast to coast. He had a steal at the top of the key, went coast to coast and dunked at 7'2", having not played basketball in 2 years and having only played for the last 6 years of his life. That's amazing. It really is. It's mind-boggling how far he personally has come. I don't know that Jahlil Okafor has progressed at all. They won't play Nerlens Noel. Dario Saric is what he is, and I think will be for a year or two. Ersan Ilyasova is probably their best all-around player, who they acquired for Jeremy Grant, who, again, hadn't progressed anywhere near what you'd hoped. So, yeah, I mean, it really brings into question not only front office but the head coach. Why is only one guy getting better? But then you say, okay, well, if you don't have anyone to run the team, if you don't have a viable point guard or much veteran presence, what do you expect? How can the coach be expected to bring the ball up and not turn it over, not step on the end line coming off a cut on the baseline like T.J. McConnell did late in the game yesterday?
Brian Colangelo came out recently. He talked about how, we really didn't have a lot of offers to move Noel and move Okafor, and he's not going to make a trade that's going to hurt the franchise, whether it's today or the future. And Marcus, I would argue that I think that's Colangelo kind of, basically giving us all a nice story to run with when it's not really reality, because why on earth would there be so many reports that teams are interested in Noel and Okafor, but yet he couldn't find the trade? It sounds like to me that he's trying to make this thing drag out as long as possible to see how high he can make this bid go.
Well, I don't understand the urgency to trade anyone. Jahlil Okafor, Nerlens Noel, and Joel Embiid are coming off injury. Joel Embiid still is playing with a minutes restriction. He may never play back-to-backs all season. He may never get up to 36 minutes per night. I don't know that you can jettison one of the other two bigs, assuming that Embiid is going to be healthy going forward. I mean, there's really no urgency. There's no emergency to either, for example, play Noel more. You kind of know what you have in him, or trade Noel or Okafor. They're insurance policies at this point, both of them. So if I'm Colangelo, you really have to blow me away with a deal that not only gives me equal value, but makes my team appreciably better where it needs to be made better. So I do believe that he hasn't received the kind of value trade that he wants and believes he needs to forfeit that insurance. We're 20, 25 games into a season that really doesn't matter. It's frustrating to watch the Sixers. It's frustrating for Sixers fans to watch the Sixers lose in Sacramento last night, but that's necessary. This is them winning a game late and having sacrificed, a guy like Noel who has real value and can do a lot of things other guys in the league can't, or Okafor, who's a wonderful offensive player. None of that makes sense in the long term. And Colangelo and Brett Brown aren't really interested in anything but the long term. They're not going to the playoffs this year, and they're probably not going next year. So, the urgency to make a move from our side, from our perspective, sure, let's get something done. From their perspective, what if something happens to Joel Embiid in the next month, and all of a sudden you've got one or two or even one player playing the post? Say something happens to Noel, who had a lingering injury this year already.
We're talking with Marcus Hayes, sports columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News. You check out all of his work at Philly.com. You also follow him on Twitter at InkStainedDretch. Marcus, let's switch over. Speaking of youth movements, to the Flyers. The Flyers are not really known for a youth movement, because this is a team that seems to just reload for about a decade and a half. But now Ron Hextall is here, and he seems to be much more willing to be patient with the process of allowing this team to transition from the old guard to the new guard. And now you have a roster that is mostly comprised of 20-year-olds.
Well, it's an interesting observation. And one of the things about hockey analytics, the use of numbers in sort of changing the DNA of hockey, is that they found that players play their best between the ages of 19 and 25. So the philosophy for analytics-driven teams has changed from signing guys at 25 to 10-year contracts to getting the most they can out of guys who are much younger and much cheaper, then sort of recalibrating from there. That, I think, will be the template going forward. And Hextall is on the forefront of that template, having come from the LA Kings, who were also on the forefront of that template. So all that said, yeah, I mean, Konechny and Provorov are, wonderful talents. Sam Gagner may be a difference maker in the future, but this is what they're going to be going forward. You're not going to see a whole lot of 32-year-old Flyers, I think, in the next decade.
And again, it's overlooked that it's not like Giroux and Voracek and Simmons are, ancient relics either. These guys are still in their late 20s, and who knows if we've actually seen all that they have to offer as well.
I think they're peaking. I think this is their peak, honestly. Claude's a little guy with a lot of miles, and he might be able to play at this level for 2 or 3 more years. I think Voracek, maybe 4 or 5 more years. Simmons, maybe 3 or 4 more years. And that's fine. They can win. They can win everything. This year, next year, the year after that. To your point, it's been interesting to watch how they've remade themselves this time versus how they've tried to remake themselves in the past by spending big money on chancy veterans whose home teams, the teams they came from, have clearly evaluated them as being poor risks going forward.
The NHL expansion draft is coming, Marcus, and one of the rules is you're only allowed to protect one goalie. And with the Flyers, they have Mason. His contract's up at the end of the year. They have Neuwirth on the roster. They have Stolarz. They have a couple other young, talented goalies in the minor leagues. What do you think the Flyers are going to do moving forward at goaltender?
I think they think Mason is their answer. He's had 2 things happen. Both Michael Neuwirth being injured and him becoming a father have changed the way that he sees things. He's a very fragile mental guy. A lot of goalies, a lot of pitchers are. If he's in a good place now and plays like this, they can't let him go. They can't risk having to develop another guy. It'll be an interesting sort of 2 months here. They've got a stretch, I think, of like 13 games in the next 22 days or so, where they play a lot of teams that don't allow many goals, which means Mason's going to be the difference maker. How he emerges from there might tell the tale of how they view him going forward.
Flipping over to the Phillies, Marcus, the Phillies are a very interesting situation because they have all this surplus of talent in the AAA and AA, and yet the major league level, it seems like they have a lot of positions that may or may not change over the next 5 years. We're not fully sure if half the guys on this team, and I don't just mean the veterans, I mean even the young guys, will be here 5-6 years from now. So looking at the Phillies, is this more of a year of transition, or is this a year of where they're basically just saying, all right, let's see what we got?
There's a saying in baseball that the only thing that grows slower than a baseball team is a bonsai tree. And you have to be just as careful in cultivating it as you do a bonsai tree. It's a daily endeavor. Yeah, they have so far to go. They have so much to learn. They don't know what they have at the positions where they know what they have, if you know what I mean. You don't know if Odubel Herrera, for example, is really that good. You hope he is, but you don't know if he's going to play to this contract. You just hope he is. And you're playing with house money, so you can sort of gamble on him. But, I mean, do you dare move Freddie Garcia from shortstop if J.P. Crawford is ready? Do you make J.P. Crawford third baseman and move Michael Franco to first base? Because now Darren Ruff's gone. But then you have a first baseman in the minors who you think might be your franchise first baseman. There are so many moving parts, and so many of these guys are going to fail. It's just the numbers of baseball between being overmatched and exhausted. They're going to fail. So if half of the players that they hope to get something out of over the next 5 to 10 years, if half of them pan out, the Phillies will be a moderately good team. They're still probably 1 star and 2 free agents away from being a viable playoff team. I mean, what they have is, it's not what Kansas City had. It's not the same animal.
Finally wrapping up, Villanova, one of the biggest sports stories of the year. They won the national title back in April, and now you look at this team, they're number 1 in the country. Chris Jenkins, Josh Hart returned for this year. They both had the opportunity to leave and go to the draft, but they went through the process. They found out they wouldn't have been high picks. They came back this year, and it seems to be paying off very well for Jay Wright. Remember before they won the title, there's a lot of questions. Is Jay Wright the right guy? Will he ever win a title? And now it seems like winning that title and then the players coming back has changed a lot of the perception around that basketball program.
It's interesting you say that. When 5 years ago, I think it was very apparent that Jay Wright had changed his recruiting philosophy to recruiting sort of second-tier guys who he had a lot of confidence would stay at least 3 or 4 years, but very good players who he could allow to play as freshmen and sophomores as part of a 9 or 10 man rotation, regardless of what league they wound up being in. And that was genius. He was ahead of that curve, the curve that, Shaka Smart had at DCU, the curve that existed in Indiana, the curve that existed at Wichita State. Jay understood that the second-tier player would win more for his type of program than trying to, get a Carmelo Anthony, have a one-and-done, one-shot every year, and reconfiguring the system year after year. That's the thing about Villanova and Jay. It's the one team in Philadelphia. There's six viable programs in Philadelphia. Jay's probably got the one that has the most capacity to change and endure change and still be relatively successful. What he's done now, as long as the NBA doesn't change its rules again, what he's done now is he's created something that's sustainable. And, you look at the people who aren't going to leave after this year, and you're excited about Villanova 2 years from now, maybe 3 years from now. He's figured it out, and I'm glad for him because he's a smart guy, and he was kind of beaten up for a long time, and it wasn't fair, and he figured out a way to beat the system, and he's beating it.
We've been talking with Marcus Hayes. You can check out all of his work in the Philadelphia Daily News, also at Philly.com. Marcus, appreciate the year in review.
Thank you very much.